Hello guys, this is Dark Fox Sage 2 and we are back with our new fanfic, which is What If Naruto Learned About His Heritage and Flew with Fū from Konoha Part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic, then please press the like button and please subscribe to the channel. It motivates me to upload more fanfic like these for you all. Now let's start the fanfiction. 2 weeks since Zabuza's death. Shadow clone technique. A wave of blonde and orange swarmed at Haku, whose hand merely made a few gestures. A mirror of ice formed before him, and cannoned forward like a battering ram with the assassin right behind. Plowing through the horde, his Senbon dispersed 20 of the clones before they even knew what hit them. Dropping his improvised shield, the too pretty boy engaged in taijutsu against the remaining clones. Against the first he merely blocked or deflected to gauge them, before snaking stiffened fingers through to crush the throat. The second clone he kicked at with reduced speed, but the clone was just a hair's breadth too slow to avoid Haku's geta from digging into its stomach. Seeming a bit smarter, the third clone was throwing every kunai and shuriken it had, while the fourth tried to blindside Haku from his right with kunai in each hand. Without even looking, the older teen grabbed the ambushing clone and hefted him into the air in front of the weapons, blocking them before dispelling into smoke, the weapons falling free. The remaining clone could only stare in surprise before his own kunai, snatched out of the air, were thrown right between his eyes. Taking a second to assess that yes, all of them were down, Haku turned to his spectator, his breathing still even. So, what did you think? The perfect duplicate of the clones, or rather they were of him, gave a heavy sigh. Naruto Uzumaki, the ex-missing nin's friend, student, and new, and unwilling, master. He refused to be referred to as Naruto-sama, yet the Leaf Genin's new tool was adaptable, which included not referring to himself as such aloud. They still don't stand a chance against you, Naruto pouted, staring at the ground in frustration. He jumped a little as a hand rested on his shoulder. Don't be like that, Haku said, having seemingly teleported over to him. I was testing them, and their hits were harder, reflexes faster, better grouping and accuracy with your weapons, and your teamwork is becoming stronger too. Or, more original, would be more on target. They were learning to use tactics more sophisticated than just charging in. You're already making incredible progress in a short period of time. Instantly Naruto was beaming. Just you wait. I'll be taking you down, and then the Hokage. Believe it. Glad to see the blonde's self-confidence bolstered, Haku gave a small smile that many uninformed adolescent boys would have killed to have sent their way. I know you will. Except never forget why it is you were able to do so well against Zabuza-sama. Because I was so surprising. Naruto promptly answered, as he had done several times before. I kept having ideas or abilities he did not expect. Same with those hunter nin, except with them it was they Kyuubi. Charging in head-on nearly got me killed twice, and likely my teammates too. So I have to learn how to keep being unpredictable, while also hiding my true potential until it is too late for the bad guys. Or do stuff like you did, laying down bombs, having clones set up like that. He looked especially interested in the potential of clones and high explosives. Grinning even more at that enthusiasm, Haku added onto that, having wanted to wait until he felt a little better before taking the lesson any further. Also, remember that while your sensei may have been stronger in an open confrontation, Zabuza-sama managed to even the odds, especially by initially avoiding such a direct fight. He had restrained Hitaki's actions and played with his mind to put him at a disadvantage. Once he lost that initiative, he lost. Then he paused to wait, making a subtle gesture at Naruto's stomach, and the seal there. Oh, gasped Naruto. And he knew to do that because everyone knew about Kakashi's Sharingan. So I should keep the Kyuubi secret. Then he lost some of his confidence. Except I don't know how to make him help. He's only come out that one time, and I don't really know why. Then he beamed again as he shoved such thoughts aside. Ah, I'll figure it out. Because I'm awesome. Yes you are, Haku strongly agreed. That said, don't forget that I, Zabuza-sama, and Hatake, have all had years to get so good. Not just experience, but proper training as well. Now he removed his hand from Naruto's shoulder. While you still need to make more progress, you're doing excellent so far, and you will definitely make it. Now, on that note, give me 100 push-ups. Without even a groan, Naruto got on the ground to begin. For his incredible stamina, this was nothing. Besides, still did need to develop his muscles, since this was one of the things his clones could not do for him. He had just never had the patience to do it this much before. And he kept losing count. Haku did that for him now. While mentally keeping track of how many Naruto was doing and giving a quick praise for having a perfect form now, for his exercises, Haku multitasked. What are characteristics of Yin Chakra? He quizzed. It took Naruto a precious few seconds to remember his lesson from last night. Oh, right. It's based on spiritual energy stuff, and is usually used for genjutsu. But some clans use it for other stuff too. Correct. Now, what element is wind ninjutsu naturally superior against? Lightning. Name the countries that neighbor the land of fire. It continued like this for the rest of the push-ups, and then to the sit-ups, including the bare basics of ninja politics and law into the second sets, before it was clear the young teen was straining too much to do hated studying and exercise at once. Of course, that very effort only highlighted how he had been neglected for so long, particularly those supposed to be teaching him even now. To think that I still haven't killed Kakashi Hatake, despite all my reasons to do so, Haku reflected with deep pride. When he had spied upon Team 7 in the Land of Waves, he had been surprised that they had only just begun rudimentary training in chakra control and stamina, despite being 12. In the Mizugakure, and Haku's personal experience, it was best to start that far younger. Granted, those were not examples of producing well-adjusted individuals, though Haku would never give up on who he was. That the genin had not learnt this in the academy was disconcerting, much less that Kakashi Hatake had only begun to teach them after they were neck-deep in an A-ranked mission. Even worse, Haku's covert observation had actually understated how bad Naruto's skills were, making him wonder just how arrogant Hatake truly was. Basic skills and knowledge were foreign to him, and it was only thanks to ridiculous amounts of chakra and a forbidden technique that he was still alive, to say nothing of harboring a demon. Instead of a honed warrior who was to be the ultimate guardian of his village, he was dealing with a brawler who was forced to rely solely upon variations of only a few techniques. The fact that since the battle on the bridge, his Jonin sensei had done nothing to intensify or even maintain the training he had begun, was truly beyond contempt. However, now that young ice user had a new precious person, he would not let this one down. Consequently, Haku had appointed himself as Naruto's personal tutor, working to bring the blonde up to par. Given everything, it was not surprising that Naruto had been enthusiastic that someone as awesome and cool as Haku would be teaching him. Despite having completed over an hour's work of non-stop exercise, Naruto bounded to his feet without a pause. Now what? He grinned. Are you finally going to teach me a super awesome jutsu? You still haven't taught me wind chakra, and you figured out my element days ago. 2 days, Haku corrected. And I stand by my original argument. Until you can properly control your chakra, it'll be too dangerous. Otherwise you might overpower your jutsu, and kill friend and foe alike. You have to be precise and versatile enough so that you know what your technique will do. Despite his eternal optimism, Naruto grimaced for a moment, before recognizing that there was still a promise that he would learn cool wind jutsu. He had just had to pass a few tests first. Groan. Oh well, he knew Haku would keep that promise. Believe it. So am I going to walk on water then? Because that's pretty cool too. They had started that while still in wave, except it had mostly involved Naruto getting wet. By the time they left though, he was at least sinking noticeably slower. Now he was able to carefully walk about on the surface, and was sure he would be running on at any time. No, we're doing your next step into sealing. Instantly Naruto came to attention. Even more than nifty ninjutsu, fuinjutsu was what he was most curious about above all else. It gave him a connection to a clan he had never known, and was earnest to make his ancestors proud. Moreover, he had seen firsthand how dangerous a man skilled in the sealing arts could be, with that Anbu hunter who had nearly killed him, several times. At the same time, he was curious as to why he had never heard about this before, including from the third Hokage. Never during any of their talks had the old man mentioned anything about the Uzumaki. You answered all my questions on the basics of sealing properly, Haku smiled, so now you can start the practical. Awesome. Giving a girlish chuckle, Haku shook his head. I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed. Taking out a scroll of his own, he released a pad of paper, a brush, and an inkwell. Your first lesson will be calligraphy. Huh, writing properly. What? I can write. Yes you can, except that when drawing out your seals, if you have a single mistake either it won't work, or something horrific will happen. Remember all those examples of failed fuinjutsu I had you read? Oh, ooh. And Naruto had to admit to himself that even if Haku was too kind to say so, his handwriting was actually atrocious. Goodness knows, Iruka had yelled that at him enough times, and then make him stay after school to improve upon it. It was eligible now, if only barely. For your second lesson however, you will also be practicing your chakra control. At the same time, moaned Naruto. Not quite, and now Haku looked serious. We're going to practice with you making a clone after all. Your clone will practice writing, while you do chakra. Huh, squinted Naruto. Why not make 100 other clones to do all that boring stuff then, while you help me with fighting? Haku just stared impassively, making Naruto fidget. He knew he was expected to answer, and started scratching his head in hopes it would help. Wait, you said, it's a forbidden technique, and we don't really know why. Maybe it's just because of the chakra though. And I'm just awesome enough to have so much. It had been by accident really that Haku had figured out that shadow clones sent their memories to their creator, and frankly Naruto felt stupid for missing that for so long. After all, he had been the one to skip that important detail on the forbidden scroll. Although once he had mentioned that part, Haku's enthusiasm had dimmed. They had experimented a little so far of course. For example, their first attempt at having two clones reading two different books at the same time, had led Naruto to only receive jumbled memories. Although using a lot of clones to look up or find something was productive. On the other hand, while a clone could not develop any stamina or muscle build that would benefit Naruto, it could retain the muscle memory of what it did, such as learning how to throw a proper punch. Unfortunately though, they still had more failures than successes. Calmly, his friend elaborated. I hear what you are saying, but because you have such enormous chakra, no one would have been able to practice this on the scale you can. Yes, you can send dozens of clones into a fight without trouble, but I'm worried that if too many clones have different memories, from a multitude of perspectives, it might be overwhelming. For all we know, too many memories and experiences coming back at once could melt the brain. Your brain. So we're going to take this slow to figure it out. Which was not unfounded, as they had found out that a large number of memories, spanning several hours, could even make Naruto black out as his subconscious was overwhelmed in trying to sort through the input. Now, if Naruto had been more introspective, he might have questioned why Haku did not just ask someone if they had further details about the technique to learn more, except the blonde was introspective enough. Granted, the ex-missing nin was under a lot of suspicion, and could not just go around asking about classified jutsu. Not to mention the assumption that surely a Jonin captain like Kakashi would have discussed the forbidden technique with his student if he knew anything. Not to mention that they were both used to figuring things out like this themselves, yes that included Zabuza, who could hardly teach his tool more than the basics of using ice release, and did not use Senbon himself without adult support. Asking for it was rather foreign for them by this point. Finally, the sad fact is that they are 12 and 15 respectively, and want to prove how awesome they are on their own. Consequently, while clones did help, Naruto was going to be doing a lot of work with his real body. Even later, finally both physically and mentally exhausted, Naruto was lying on his back, taking a break. Beside him, Haku was meditating, and had informed his student he would be learning this in the future too during downtime. Well, while it was boring, if Haku said it was useful, then it was. Still, despite how completely and utterly tired he was, thoughts were still swirling around in his head, even if it was beyond him to latch onto one. Thoughts that he had been burying deep over the last few days. Like, why didn't the old man ever tell me about the Uzumaki clan? My family. What happened to them really? About how shadow clones work. He knows I have trouble reading. Kakashi doesn't train us enough. But he brings me vegetables, and Haku agrees they're healthy. Was he ever going to tell me about the Kyuubi? Why can't I find anything about the Uzumaki on my own? Not even in the library. I had to learn from people from another country. A strong part of him wanted to just run into the Hokage's, one of his precious people, as Haku put it, office, loudly demanding an answer. He almost had even, if not for Haku. His new friend had stood in his way, and insisted that Naruto should try and figure out for himself first. To prove he could. While this challenge was so transparently meant to make Naruto not go to the old man about it, well, he could never back down from a proper challenge. Besides, a totally awesome, hardcore ninja would figure this out by himself, right? Except once he had sat down to think of ideas and theories, and where to find his answers, more and more questions had started to pop up. After all, he had never been told about the demon, and what could be worse than that? How would a few stories about the Uzumaki hurt? And he never told me about the Kyuubi over all those years either, even though we saw each other so much. Will he say it's a secret too, and just not tell me? Would it be better to find out for myself first? And why haven't he or Kakashi talked to me about them, when they know Haku is telling me this sort of stuff I'm learning now? All of this hurt deep down into someone who was supposed to be just a boy, now burdened with far more than one of his years should bear. And in his years of being a pariah and a prankster, he had learned to hold fast to whatever troubled him, and be careful and cautious with it. Land of Fire. Konohagakure. Hokage Tower. Sitting in his office, Hiruzen Sarutobi silently bemoaned his fate. While the majority of the ninja world held the third Hokage in high regard, as the man who had mastered every jutsu known to the Hidden Leaf, and had risen to S rank on his own without any bloodline, generational technique, or special weapon, the same could not be said among the small club of the village leaders. Among this exclusive group, how little the amount of paperwork you had to do and how you handled it, was the highest sign of status. Yes, that is how the mightiest shinobi quietly established their status amongst each other through diplomatic correspondence and closed-door meetings. And while Hiruzen could still use the shadow clone technique, the depressing fact was that he no longer had enough chakra to risk using a jutsu that left him so vulnerable. Assassination attempts were a real concern after all, even without accounting for his friend, Danzo. After all, the third Kazekage, the strongest to have held that title, had mysteriously disappeared all those years ago, along with his personal Anbu guard. Thus, by unspoken law, the god of ninjas' colleagues snickered at him in closed meetings, and his endless pile of paperwork continued to mock him. At the top of the stack was the most recent report from his Anbu carrying out surveillance on Naruto. It appeared that the Hokage's gamble with Haku had paid off in spades, as they were reporting massive development in the young boy's abilities. Truthfully, he had originally been highly skeptical of letting an unknown foreigner anywhere near Naruto, no matter how much his surrogate grandson trusted the kid. Period. Exclamation mark. There was no way it was going to happen without several seals attached to the ice user, a 24/7 guard, and maybe seeing if those experiments with implanting conditioning via genjutsu had any potential after all. Except, well, it almost seemed silly really, but he had woken up early one morning while Team 7 was still traveling back, having had the best sleep he could remember in years. It had been a beautiful dream really, and had included Naruto and Haku helping the leaves of Konoha flourish. In that fantasy, Naruto had been much stronger and more mature, yet still possessing his wonderfully free spirit. A growth that he had attributed to Haku's training. Wondering if his subconscious was trying to tell him something, Hiruzen had taken the risk, with the proviso that Inoichi Yamanaka still examined the boy's mind. And it appeared his highly tuned intuition had been perfectly right as the reports poured in. Taking a break from his evil paperwork, he looked through his crystal ball to once again observe how the duo were progressing. It had not been a flawless process, of course, as Haku had initially run into a bit of a roadblock since Naruto learned better through practical examples than theory. Still, thanks to lots of work, serene patience, and positive encouragement by someone near his own age, Naruto was making frankly staggering progress in just a few weeks. With one-on-one attention and incentives, he was finally taking them time for ninja theory and book learning. Some days, for his studies, he was actually enthusiastic to be going to the library. Even his serious issues with chakra control were steadily improving. More importantly, based upon his own and Anbu observations, it seemed Naruto was also becoming more mentally healthy due to this constant and supportive interaction. Some in the village might express surprise at this, wondering how this was garnering better results than tough love, or letting a ninja work through his struggles alone. Personally, Hiruzen kept making a mental note to double-check if the history courses were teaching the reasons why Hashirama and Tobirama Senju had been so adamant to found a ninja village. Oh, and Madara too. That was not to say everything was perfect, of course, such as how the boy was also becoming more distant from Team 7. Originally Hiruzen had assigned them together because the teachers had theorized that the three of them would empower and support each other. A rivalry between Sasuke and Naruto would push them both to grow stronger, and also fill in the mutual familial holes in their lives. Sakura would help keep them grounded to reality even as the boys pulled her out of her shell into becoming a more active ninja. Also, she was supposed to be the support ninja for two combat types with significant potential. Although truthfully, the Hokage suspected that said teachers also wanted their two favorite students to get the most attention possible from a living legend, believing Kakashi Hatake would ignore the pariah. Regardless, he had seen enough potential in their claims to give it a shot. Plus it was policy to balance out the teams, with the belief that the two best of the class would cover for the weakest link until he learned to be strong himself. Or die. Not that Kakashi would let any of his teammates die, so no worries there. Unfortunately, according to Kakashi's reports, by the time Haku had appeared, not enough progress had been made in forming that hoped for teamwork. Now Naruto's personal development had him looking elsewhere for social interaction and training. It appears, the old man mused, that Naruto is continuing to be the unpredictable one. Sadly, I'm still unsure if he is ready for the truth. Just a little while longer, he promised, ignoring a little voice that told him he was procrastinating. Again the man felt regret for his actions, or rather lack of it, towards a boy he considered a grandson, yet his hands had been tied, despite his dictatorial power. Village politics, along the fear of what would happen to him if other nations learned of his heritage. As the years went by, it seemed that only as an orphan could Naruto be simultaneously safe, and the balance within the village could be maintained. Moreover, he had just learned about the Kyuubi. Seeing how well he could keep that a secret, one that was already fairly well known by those around him, would be a good test to determine if he could remain silent regarding the truth of the fourth Hokage. Except how long will it take to be sure it is safe? Wondered the third Hokage, a bitter taste in his mouth. No, that is just an excuse. It needs to be soon. Land of Fire. Konohagakure. Naruto's house. The next morning, with a grunt, Naruto dragged himself out of bed. While even a trained Jonin would be aching from such a workout the day before, or the relative equivalent for someone of their heightened condition, he just felt his usual grogginess and stiffness as he started a new day at a frankly unnatural 5 in the morning. He knew Haku would be coming by soon for another 16-hour day for the two of them. The only breaks from training, studying, or testing were meals, mandatory cool-downs, and of course doing the D-ranked missions that Team 7 had restarted for some reason. Plus his regular, mandatory training under Kakashi, although frankly that stuff was far less difficult than anything he had done with Haku. At the end, Naruto would be carried home and dumped into his bed for sleep. I'm making super awesome progress too. Although I'm starting to wish I could have the time for a long and decent shower, yet Mr. Living on the run for ages just keeps ignoring me. Training to be an elite ninja is great and all, but I reek. And somehow he still comes out looking perfect and prettier than Sasuke and any other girl, except Sakura. He paused at that. Despite his attraction towards Sakura, he no longer felt the same enthusiasm at going to see Team 7. Sasuke kept ignoring him, and Sakura kept hitting him for instance. She also didn't believe me when I said how much I was training, claiming there was no way I could survive that. Then Haku backed me up, and even said the Uzumaki clan was supposed to be famous for their stamina, which I do seem to have. Which is just like him, saying nice stuff like that. A part of Naruto recognized that his newfound friend and servant, but nuts to that, was being a bit manipulative at times, using arguments like, a future Hokage needs to know, or, one of the skills they'll look for in the future Hokage is, as part of convincing him to willingly learn the ninja basics, despite how Naruto was supposed to be too cool for lame stuff like that. Not that I'll ever really complain. Having Haku in my life, he's an awesome precious person. He actually expects that I will do well and succeed in what I'm doing, and go on to be the most awesome Hokage ever. He always acts proud of how I'm advancing. That's more than anyone's ever done for me. Even the old man and Iruka-sensei have never been around for all that. He can still be a bit of a sadist though, and it's even worse given how he smiles so beautifully while doing it. Not to mention when he had that crazy idea about only having ramen twice a week. That was the only point that Naruto firmly put his foot down for. For if reasoned arguments and encouragement were not enough for Naruto to keep going with the boring stuff sometimes, then a Senbon needle in a painful spot would do it. Even if it was only in a clone, the memories of that would still come back, which really made it worse given that provided Haku with more opportunities. Land of Fire. Konohagakure. Streets of Konohagakure. A few hours later, seeing as how Naruto was currently doing a D-level mission, and that the Hokage had subtly hinted it would be best to leave Kakashi alone, Haku had some free time as he was strolling through the village. Yet what was he to do with it? I could find some girls, but Naruto might be done before it gets fun. Food. No, lunch was enough. That weapons store looks interesting, yet both Naruto and I have all we need. I'm still a little tired from today's workout, so maybe a nap. Yeah, it'll make it easier to keep up with Naruto. Haku Yuki. Casually turning around, Haku regarded the man walking towards him. My name is Iruka Yumino. I'm a former teacher of Naruto's, and I would like to talk to you about the training you've been giving Naruto. Cocking his head, Haku considered everything he had already heard about this individual from Naruto. This man had not only saved Naruto's life, but had also been the only person besides the third Hokage to believe in Naruto and push him towards success, so at the very least Haku owed him some courtesy. Nodding, he indicated a conveniently located pub for them to sit down and talk. Land of Fire. Konohagakure. Training Ground 3. An hour later, Sakura stared sullenly at Naruto's back as he hurried off after their latest training exercise. The Baka had been changing a lot recently, ever since Haku had come into his life. Whenever he was mouthing off or acting like a clown like always, She would try and hit him to make him focus as usual, except now he would just dodge her attempts. He even tried to act like he was doing it casually. Sasuke-kun is getting upset too, seeing Naruto's sudden progress. It's making him look bad with the dead last catching up like that, acting like he can compete with a cool elite like the last Uchiha. And how dare he say I need to train harder after what happened with Zabuza. I did just fine given what we were up against. What more does he expect me to have done? Yet the last time she had yelled that at Naruto, he had just said something. Whatever that meant. I'm perfectly good as a ninja. I was the highest ranking kunoichi at the academy. Yes, it had been a little startling to wake up on the bridge to all those corpses, but she knew Kakashi was really in control of the situation the whole time. The training their sensei had been giving them proved that, and she had been confident he would keep them all safe. Even Naruto when he kept rushing in like an idiot. Honestly, who does he think he is? Still, Sakura was a little puzzled by Haku's revelation about the Uzumaki clan. Apparently they had been a clan that had ruled the small village of Uzushiogakure, the hidden whirlpool, and had been masters of the sealing arts. She would have called him a liar, if Kakashi-sensei had not confirmed this himself. Well, made a word of agreement and turned back to his book. Still, Sakura found it weird she had never heard about them before. Maybe they had a very humiliating or treacherous end, and that was one of the reasons her mom did not want her hanging out with the dunce. Regardless, she highly doubted anyone like Naruto could make much progress in such a complicated subject. If someone like her or Sasuke were not doing it, then it would prove too hard for Naruto. He would probably give up on it eventually, or Haku would concede defeat in frustration at his lack of progress. An idiot was still an idiot, and even if he made some clones to help him out, that just meant more idiots running about being loud and useless. At least he's not hitting on me anymore, not that Haku would permit him the time for a date. Especially given how he smells now. Seriously, I thought that Haku was supposed to be Naruto's servant, not the other way around. Across the field, another brooding teenager was also puzzling over the departing orange headache after they had finished the most recent round of teamwork building exercises. Sasuke's emotions were in a turmoil regarding Naruto, though jealousy and frustration were at the forefront. Sasuke trained constantly, every day, every waking moment. His only goal was to become strong enough to kill that man. To become an Avenger. Even when he was cooling down from his latest exercise routine, he was using his newfound Sharingan to memorize information to help him succeed. He pored through books on the theory of tracking down Nukenin, the appearance and properties of medical herbs, tactics and strategy. He tried to get some jutsu scrolls through official channels, but apparently his ninja rank was not high enough to get any significant ones without permission, and Kakashi would not grant it. He needed to become stronger, as their time in the Land of Waves proved. Sakura had been as useless as expected, yet Sasuke had been taken out early on without being able to contribute anything. Worse, when he had awoken, it had been Naruto poking him awake. The dead last had been in better shape than their sensei, and Kakashi had done nothing to correct the Dobi's boasts on how well he had done. And now he was rapidly progressing in such a short period of time. What was Sasuke missing that would allow a loser to make such advances while he himself was developing so slowly? Because Kakashi did not permit sparring matches between team members, he was unable to truly test himself to prove his superiority over the Dobi. However, he could still see how Naruto's form was quickly becoming far more fluid, with fewer openings in its. Am I not really getting as strong as I thought I was? Sasuke wondered. Will I never be able to bridge the gap between me and that man? Because I know that as powerful as Zabuza claimed to be, that man would still have casually killed him even years ago. For his part, Kakashi was also a little concerned with how fast Naruto was developing, and how it could throw off the team's dynamic, which might lead to one of them dying like Obito. Sakura was falling even further behind, and Sasuke's psyche was too precarious still to permit someone like Naruto rise to challenge him. Given more time under Kakashi's guiding hand, that would change, except it was still too early. On the flip side, if Kakashi tried to interfere with Naruto's growth, it would seriously damage the boy's trust in his superior, which would lead to all sorts of negative consequences. What should I do? He wondered despondently. The drills I'm doing to help their teamwork only seem to work on the training field, and only because I'm their adversary, an enemy to unite them. On a personal level, they're even more dysfunctional than my genin team was under Minato-sensei. At this rate, I'll be forced to give Sasuke extra training to keep him from doing anything drastic if he gets too frustrated at his lack of progress. Land of Fire. Konoha, conveniently located pub. And another reason I'm worried about Naruto's lack of social interaction is that he's had trouble learning values that are common to most people, especially with ethics. Haku nodded silently at this, approving of all the insight Iruka had shown thus far, and realizing he may have made a few false assumptions about how best to prepare Naruto for a ninja's life. The ninja world could be very accepting of unorthodox or eccentric ninja, so long as they could get results. Yet if someone already had a lot of prejudice against them before they even started, say by having a tailed beast in their gut, then it was another story. And acceptance was even more difficult if the ninja in question had highly unusual opinions on commonly approved morals. As the years passed from the time of the Warring States period, hidden villages as a whole were increasingly wary about comrades who were both highly trained killers, and also significantly diverged from the norm in terms of social interaction and ethical standards. After all, who knew what such people would do next? So it was only really alright if these social outsiders were all confirmed to be very obedient, and unquestionably loyal to their leaders. While Naruto was loyal to the Hokage and village, he was anything but obedient or predictable. Moreover, if someone replaced the third Hokage as leader, Naruto might maintain his professional loyalty for them, if not his personal loyalty. In that case, Naruto needed friends and allies within the system, and perhaps even get to know all the candidates for being the future Hokage. Whatever Haku might think about his own parents, they had still managed to hammer in a strong moral foundation into him, which Zabuza and his companions had added onto. Haku was well aware that he was still atypical in personality, even for a ninja, never mind a civilian, as he was ninja who tried to be a pacifist of all things, but became coldly brutal if his precious people were threatened. Most people could not handle such an instantaneous switch between extremes, and resided somewhere in between. And then there was his passion for cross-dressing and other hobbies. Meanwhile, Iruka was still talking. I suspect that most of what he has learned is from talks with the third Hokage, or childhood stories that he overheard other people telling. He believes that there are evil people in the world, but I am a little worried about how he defines them, and how readily he accepts they should die. Once again, Haku nodded in response, remembering how he had worked to make Naruto see why it was a bad thing so many people had died at the bridge, and had then helped Naruto feel better afterwards. Because those hunter ninja had been attacking him, Naruto had labeled them bad guys, who obviously deserved death, overlooking how being a ninja would require him in the future be attacking other people, and thus be the bad guy, in turn. Naruto's sadness over Zabuza-sama's passing had also been a little surprising, if appreciated. I may have the skills to make a trained killer, yet it appears I am still too inexperienced in making a trained and functional ninja. A functional person, Haku conceded reluctantly. Why are you telling me this? Haku finally asked aloud. Because you are able to spend more time with Naruto than I am. And you are free to help him in ways I am not. What do you suggest? Konoha, Naruto's apartment. A day off. Yes, Haku said, managing a small smile to Naruto. Back when the former had been training under Zabuza-sama, he had relished each and every opportunity to strive, so he could prove his worth when he succeeded. However, he had to also admit he was not exactly normal. While Naruto relished the attention he was receiving as well, his purpose in life was to be more than just a tool. An assassin. To be the future Hokage, he had to be more. That included having the chance to relax so he did not crack under pressure. Yada! Cried Naruto. In a flash, he was kneeling on the floor across the room, prying up a particular floorboard with a kunai, and yanked out a sack. Then in another blur of orange, he was running out the door. What happened, and how'd I miss that hidey hole? Caught between checking the secret cache and seeing what his friend was up to, Haku hesitated a costly few seconds, before racing after the blonde. Land of Fire. Konohagakure. Random Street. So, what are we doing? Asked Haku. Pranking. Gleefully exclaimed Naruto. I'm thinking of turning this one market street bright pink. Oh, and cover the pavement in a massive puddle of, green paint. This was exactly the sort of behavior that Iruka had warned Haku about. Naruto, he warned, you're a genin now, a legal adult. If you get caught, there will be serious consequences. I know that. That's why I'm not doing it with Orange. We just won't get caught. Unlikely, Haku knew. He tried a different track. That kind of behavior will make it harder for you to become Hokage. Huh? Naruto blinked owlishly at him. What do you mean? Of course I'm gonna become Hokage. Believe it. If you go about pranking people, it'll be harder to get the Jonin votes. More confusion. What do you mean? To be Hokage you just gotta be awesome. Taken aback, the pretty boy could only stare. Does he know? He cut himself off. Of course Naruto would be oblivious to the actual requirements to become Hokage. Or Kage in general. He had just assumed that his friend would have put a little more forethought into his dream. Although, it's possible he never looked because he was afraid of what he'd find. In Konoha, he slowly said, you need to be nominated by the Fire Daimyo, and then ratified by a majority vote of the Jonin Council. Or chosen by the previous Hokage, and still pass the vote. If you go about upsetting people, then it will be even harder. Sullenly Naruto glared at Haku, angry at his friend for arguing with him, and failing to believe he could become Hokage still. Even if he kept up the pranks. I can and I will. Believe it. Just watch. With a huff, he took off. Sighing, Haku followed from the shadows. Stealth was one of his specialties, and he would intervene when needed. Later, totally and utterly speechless, Haku could only stare agape as Anbu ran around like chickens with their heads cut off. What is wrong with this village? Naruto Uzumaki, the former dead last of his academy class, with frankly abysmal skills when Haku had met him. Except then he went around and displayed low-level Jonin class stealth and cunning as he set up pranks and traps that had adult ninja looking like incompetence. Worse, incompetence covered in glow-in-the-dark, pink glitter, and catnip. Haku himself had barely been able to keep up with Naruto, especially when he got on the move, displaying evasive tactics that were frankly humbling for both their simplicity and ingenuity. He had nearly lost the blonde when all of a sudden his chakra signature had simply vanished, somehow being completely suppressed, which made sense if you wanted to evade notice despite having massive chakra reserves in addition to housing the mightiest of tailed beasts. Otherwise even only half-decent sensors would be able to pick him up, never mind the infamous Byakugan. The final straw being how there was no evidence left behind, with Naruto dropping stink bombs to throw off even Ninken. Konoha's legendary forces were left in the dust. The worst of the worst was Naruto appeared utterly oblivious to the significance of the skills he used for pranking. Pranking. Clearly someone was missing the ball somewhere, and if Zabuza had been in charge here, those missing balls would have been heads. Lots of heads. Along with the surviving Anbu receiving remedial classes from a 12-year-old. Personally, Haku was feeling a grudging respect and pity for the Anbu, for having to put up with Naruto's pranks, the word itself did not do proper justice, for so long. A part of him also felt it is probably best he did not know where Naruto got the materials he used, especially when surviving on only a genin's paycheck. Plausible deniability and all that, especially with that much pink paint. He may be an obedient servant come friend, but he is also still on probation. Land of Fire. Konohagakure. Random Street. Next day. Naruto ran as fast as he could so that he would not be late. Haku had suggested he get in touch with some of his fellow ex-classmates, to which he had been reluctant until his friend mentioned it was Aruka's suggestion. Which meant it was perfectly fine. Especially since his former teacher would know how Naruto's previous attempts at making friends had failed. Sure enough, when he had jumped in to meet some of them after confirming he had successfully ditched the Anbu, that afternoon, they had said yes. Even better, so had some of their teammates. Turned out that they were all quite happy to talk to their fellow genin and reconnect, even if it had only been a little while since graduation. Guess Shikamaru, Choji, and Kiba were closer precious Peo, friends. Friends was the word he meant to use now, than he thought. Unfortunately, he had lost track of time completing Team 7's mission, cleaning up some old woman's house, because he had gotten into an argument with Sasuke about who should be doing what. I barely had time to wash off of the sweat from this morning's training, and I might still be late. Thankfully, it looked like he had gotten there just in time, and his heart glowed as he saw them. Kiba and Izuka, he and Naruto kept butting heads with each other, but they had been sort of like pals back in the academy. More mature and older now sort of. Kinda. If you squinted a bit, the two of them found themselves surprisingly happy to be hanging out again. Maybe I should offer being sparring partners. When he had invited the rest of Team 8 along, as Kiba had just finished training with them, he had been surprised when they agreed. He had asked despite figuring they would say no after all. Not that he would admit to ever being less than 100% confident. Shino Aburame had readily accepted. Naruto had always thought the sunglasses-wearing kid was another one of those people at the academy who was always ignoring him, yet after thinking about it last night, he wondered if Shino was equally distant with everybody. Except for his teammates now, and as Kiba was going along, why not go too? Besides, how many people asked the silent guy to hang out? Even shy Hinata Hyuga had said yes, after blushing for half a minute. It was a shame that she was like that, but maybe having friends, he was pretty sure in hindsight she did not hang out with anybody in school either, and some encouragement would help her. Because that was what friends did, believe it. With a flying leap, Naruto had joined the members of Team 8, heartened by how he was not as exhausted as he once might have been from such an intense run, sending another silent thank you to Haku for his new training. Hearing a familiar voice saying, "Troublesome," Naruto noted that Shikamaru Nara and Choji Akamichi had just beaten him there. They had been two other fellow delinquents from school that Haku had encouraged Naruto to get to know some more, and he always enjoyed his time with them immensely. Maybe I should have tried harder getting to know them outside of school. Naruto. Kiba loudly called out in greeting. Hinata forced herself to straighten up some more and look Naruto in the eye, and say in a voice that would actually carry over to him, "Gee, good to see you, and Naruto-kun." "Greetings," said Shino from behind his high-collared coat. As weird as he was still polite to Naruto. Choji grinned and nodded, mouth full of chips. Shikamaru merely flicked his eyes to acknowledge Naruto's presence, and closed his lids. For the lazy Nara, that was the equivalent of a cheery greeting. "Yo," he shouted in turn to them all. "Yo yourself," grinned Kiba. "Man, you stink. You shoulda showered longer. Aw, shut it with your peeping nose." The two hotheads quickly devolved into squabbling, while the others looked on. Finally Shino and Choji started talking about their respective training, which drew the rest in too. After about a half hour of pleasant conversation, just standing around in the park where they met, Naruto remembered something else. "Hey, guys," Naruto asks, addressing them all. "Why yes, Naruto-kun," Hinata replied quietly, fighting down her stutter. "Can we go grab Haku too?" He doesn't really have anyone to be with besides me here, except he's so super cool too. He knows so many awesome things. Shikamaru just muttered, troublesome, yet nodded in agreement. I do not believe that will be a problem, intoned Shino. Why? Because if he is a friend of yours, he is likely not disagreeable to know. The others seemed okay with it too, and Kiba was curious to meet the dead last's friend. Especially given Naruto's description of his new training regime under the foreigner. The Inuzuka clan were huge gossips, and many had been openly perplexed as to why a missing nin had been let in like that. For some reason, they were weirdly confused that he was staying with Naruto too, with lots of significant glances that they would not explain to a kid about. More importantly, when he and Naruto had met the other day, he had challenged the blonde to a spar to show off how good he was. Against all expectations, it had been him who was handed his rear, along with a bloody nose, disabusing him of many assumptions. That kind of strength was something he could respect. Meanwhile, hidden up above in the trees, Jonin Asuma Sarutobi shot Jonin Kurenai Yuhi a glance. Both of them had been understandably wary of a foreign, ex-missing nin hanging around their students. Especially as Kakashi had confided that Zabuza considered Haku's skills to exceed their own. That was concerning. Zabuza had been skilled enough of an assassin to be confident he could kill a Kage, and had been strong enough to not only survive the immediate reprisals, but successfully flee the army of pursuers on his tail. To reiterate, he had made a direct attempt to kill a Kage, and lived to tell about it. Shaking her head, she whispered to him, when I confronted the ex-missed kid yesterday evening about how he was encouraging Naruto hanging around with the heirs of prominent clans, especially the ones on my team, he said it was just to help Naruto make friends. Saying it was Chunin Iruka Yumino, their former academy teacher, who originally suggested it to him, saying that the members of my team were all friendly or neutral towards Naruto back in the academy. Which yes, I checked. And then he pointed out how many Anbu were always keeping an eye on both Naruto and him anyways, if I was worried about my subordinate's safety. Truthfully, I am glad for this. Hinata and Shino need to open up more, so as long as the boy doesn't insult them, this should help. As for Kiba, losing to the dead last of his graduating class should make him take his training even more seriously. Although now that he's less cocky, I bet he'd do better next time. Asuma thought it over for a moment, before giving a resigned nod. Anyone who could possibly help Shikamaru get out of their safety zone was not someone he wanted to discourage. Besides, the kid was good for his nephew. Satisfied for now, yet resolving to keep an eye and ear out, Asuma calmly took out and lit a cigarette, now that the Inuzuka kid and his dog had moved on. Land of Fire. Konohagakure. Danzo Shimura's home. Danzo found himself forced to conclude that he had made an error regarding Naruto Uzumaki. It had been his hope that the presence of a ninja from the Bloody Mists would demonstrate for the Jinchuriki how soft Konoha was becoming. That Haku Yuki would work to correct the weaknesses that grew from living in such a suicidally pacifistic village. That was why Danzo had not put any serious effort into trying to convince Hiruzen to keep the effeminate boy away from the weapon, and only made just enough noise so that his old friend would not be suspicious about his acceptance of a foreign national. After all, Danzo respected the third Hokage enough to know the man would have never tolerated the Yuki boy's freedom of movement if his loyalty to the Jinchuriki was at all in question. Unfortunately, it was becoming clear why the ice user and his master were in exile from their home. For while Haku Yuki was making the village's weapon undeniably stronger, he had suddenly changed his tune, letting it waste valuable time, letting it create frivolous and wasteful relationships with other villagers its age, or pranking when it could be doing more training. It appeared that despite his reputation, Zabuza Momochi had lacked the proper ruthlessness that was expected of ninja of the village hidden in the Bloody Mists. A failing he had passed on to his pupil. This disregard for potential was compounded by the fact it was now clear that Yuki was undermining all the effort Danzo had spent making the weapon emotionally vulnerable via discreet use of his disbanded, route to derail any attempts to improve the Jinchuriki's life. Although truthfully, playing upon the ignorant village's fears and paranoia, their terror of what was sealed within the Jinchuriki did not take much effort. Altering Academy reports to put the weapon into such a dysfunctional squad would have only enhanced this, by preventing it from forming any meaningful bonds with its teammates. Teaching it how shallow its connections with its fellow Leaf Ninja really were. If not for this recent interference, Danzo would have waited a little longer, maybe another 6 months, before approaching it, already a legal adult, and offer it a chance to no longer feel the pain of being alone, as Danzo's personal apprentice. Possibly with a little help from his Mangekyo Sharingan. Furthermore, it appeared that Momochi's protege was more skilled than expected, possibly surpassing his master. Covert action against Haku Yuki would prove extremely difficult, as indicated by how he visibly kept track of the Anbu the third Hokage had assigned to keep watch over him and the weapon. The training the weapon had been receiving increased the challenge of approaching unimpeded, especially since hordes of clones were routinely seen traveling back and forth in the area where it lived, or staying close by to its new teacher so that they could ask questions or tell what it had learned to earn praise. Moreover, it would be uncommonly difficult to take the simplest method of removing this irritant. After all, as a former assassin, the foreigner was well on guard for similar attempts on his life, and was skilled enough that more direct attacks would be thwarted long enough to escape or raise the alarm. Danzo did have root assassins who could eliminate the Yuki, but given the circumstances and his association with the weapon, the third Hokage would carry out an immediate and intense inquiry that Danzo might be unable to deflect. No, I will continue to be patient. It is essential that I possess the 9 tails, but for now the situation is tolerable. The Jinchuriki is growing stronger, and even under Hiruzen, such power will still benefit Konoha a little. And Haku Yuki cannot stay with the weapon forever, eventually an opportunity will present itself. Land of Fire. Konohagakure. Streets of Konohagakure. Said Jinchuriki and his friends were presently strolling towards a pub where Haku had said he was going to grab a bite to eat, talking about the various D-ranked missions they had been doing. They do teach us some interesting skills, Naruto-kun, Hinata said, still a little nervous about correcting her former crush, like when we do babysitting, which helps if we'll have KKK kids later. Or we can gain some background experience and skills to help us carry out undercover work, like when we help with construction work. A bunch help us practice teamwork and self-discipline too. Shino nodded. Those missions are not to be underestimated. Why? Because there are valuable lessons to be taught with them, if you take the time to pay attention to discover what is offered. Shikamaru did not bother saying anything, since everyone already knew his opinion on the matter, not to mention work in general. While Choji was silent, he was not currently eating, and paying close attention. Kiba was momentarily caught between either wholeheartedly agreeing with Naruto, or supporting his teammates, when he felt Akamaru stiffen on top of his head. Long experience told him from his dog's tension and movement on his head that the dog had suddenly turned around to look back the way they had come, and Kiba followed suit. Just passing the group of Leaf Genin were 3 foreigners. The middle one caught the motion from the corner of his eye, and stopped to turn and look back as well so that he was facing Kiba. He was about their age, with red hair, no eyebrows, a tattoo with the kanji for love over one eye, and a large gourd on his back. This was all secondary to the eyes that caught Kiba's attention, and not because they were ringed in black. They were dead eyes, without emotion or intent behind them, and what they lacked merely gave the boy a far more lethal and ominous appearance. Nervously, the redhead's companions quickly doubled back to rejoin him, a girl with blonde hair and a boy dressed in black with war paint on. Both of them had objects on their backs, yet Kiba kept his full focus on the apparent leader of the mini-pack. Belatedly he noticed the creepy kid had the headband for village hidden in sand around his upper arm. Oh, said Naruto in surprise when he looked to see what had set Kiba off so much, you guys must be here for the Chunin exam. That would be a logical conclusion, Shino said calmly, having been reminded by his dad about the upcoming event. For as one of the four noble clans, the Aburame were expected to attend the final part of the exam as part of audience. Given how they are foreign ninja freely traversing through the village without impediment from the authorities. Naruto pretended to understand what some of those words meant, and assumed that Shino just meant that if no one on this occupied street was trying to arrest these three, then they had permission to be here. So he stepped forward with a friendly grin, though both Kankuro and Tamari noticed how while orange-clad kid's posture was casual, he had stepped away from his friends for more freedom of movement. So you're just playing tourist? The loud boy said with a grin. The redhead just stared back impassively, while Kankuro felt his irritation boiling. While he wanted to put this impudent brat in his place, he did not want to draw attention from Gaara either. Fortunately, Tamari chose to be diplomatic. Yeah, we're just looking around at the sights. Why? Well, you should really stop at Ichiraku's ramen stand. Naruto proceeded to give directions, and then let his mouth talk about the wonders of ramen automatically as he accessed the three ninja in front of him. The two older ones were serious and strong-looking, and probably were if they were being sent for the Chunin exam. Haku's lectures had been clear on what role those tests played in modern ninja society. Except for some reason they appeared more than a little afraid of their youngest teammate. Given how much emphasis ninja put into hiding their emotions, that it was so visible might mean they were outright terrified of him. About halfway through a monologue that was almost a sermon to convert people to the holy path of ramen, the particular sand ninja who everyone was feeling concerned about, silently turned around and continued on his way. Relieved, the other foreigners quickly followed behind. Naruto and his friends waited a few moments, while Akamaru made a few quiet yips and barks to his partner, and then Naruto let the fake smile drop from his face, and turned back to the others. Something's wrong with that team, Naruto mused out loud. Choji looked at him in surprise, while Kiba and Hinata frowned in agreement. Shikamaru gave a small, disgusted sigh, and Shino nodded. What do you mean, Naruto? Choji asked. Haku told me about the Chunin exams. They've become a way for nations to show off their strength and advertise for job commissions in front of domestic and international audiences. They also have a high fatality rate, not to mention people getting crippled. So when hidden villages send teams to compete when the exams are in other countries, they only send their best. Yet even I could tell their team was more dysfunctional than mine. Those older two were scared of their own teammate. He smelled of blood, Kiba growled. He utterly reeked of it. Hinata could tell from Kiba's body language that the boy was actually nervous. You and Akamaru got a sense of his chakra levels, didn't you, Kiba? Because my Byakugan after we parted told me it was enormous. And from what I saw of their body language, they were definitely afraid of the red-haired boy, yet he gave off no hints of his own feelings. Approving of how Hinata was taking this seriously and not stuttering, Shino added his own insight as he pushed up his glasses to punctuate his words. I know they are dangerous. Why? Because my Kikaichu could sense the sheer amount of chakra the youngest had, despite the fact he was so young, when his chakra coils should still be developing. It's not a real squad, Shikamaru finally contributed, wanting to get this conversation over with, since it was taking so long for the others to reach the same conclusion as him. The other two are strong, maybe even unusually so for genin their age, except the so-called team is actually centered on the creepy kid. He's supposed to handle this all on his own, and they provide the mandatory numbers for entering this exam. Shikamaru ignored everyone's surprised glances, while Choji nervously pulled out another bag of chips. Don't ask how he knows, he advised a confused Naruto. The last time I asked for Shikamaru to explain how he reached an answer like that, I just go confused by all the details he had. There's something else, Hinata added, her relapse gaining her extra attention. The amount of chakra he had. Kiba and Shino nodded, Akamaru says that only other person he's met with so much chakra is Naruto, the former finished for her. At this, Naruto tensed up as he realized a scary possibility. Guys, I know you've probably already figured this out, but we should be careful about them, maybe even give a heads up to our teachers so that we're sure our superiors are aware. Land of Fire. Konoha. Small bridge. The next day, Team 7 was sitting around waiting for Kakashi to show up for their next mission. Naruto was going through a book about weapons, and throwing out comments about them to Sasuke and Sakura. The first would just grunt while trying to hide his annoyance at the noise, and Sakura was visibly showing her frustration. Why do you even care? She finally snapped. Why even bother asking about this junk? You're just trying to look cool. Without looking up, Naruto nodded in agreement. Well, yeah, coolness is part of it all. That's part of why swords are so attractive. But I want to think about other stuff before I commit to it though. That comment got Sasuke mildly curious, so he spoke up. I would have thought Haku would be training you with Senbon, given that's his specialty. Well, yeah, except I'm not accurate enough, and whatever weapon I choose would take a lot of commitment. So I don't want to start training, only to find something else better. Sakura just sweat dropped at this, and sat down onto the bridge in exasperation. Alright, what was that last one again? Beats sitting around bored waiting for Kakashi-sensei. So when Kakashi stealthily arrived, he found his students throwing back and forth comments about various ninja tools and weapons. Excellent, he happily thought. They're coming together more on their own. The Chunin exam will finish the job. With that, he left his hiding spot and moved forward so that even his little genin would detect him. This would be the perfect time to tell them about the upcoming tournament. Unfortunately, the response he got was less than encouraging. Are you nuts? Naruto yelled. This exam is for the elite genin. The best of the best, and we've only done one serious mission. And we nearly all died. Realizing Naruto's uncharacteristic concern was infecting Sakura, Sasuke quickly spoke up in a condescending voice. What's wrong? Still chicken? Flinching, Naruto turned to glare at the Uchiha. What's wrong with me? He wondered. Did that eyebrowless freak from yesterday really shake me up that much? No. No way. Quickly returning to his loud self, Naruto puffed up his chest. What are you talking about? I'm just worried about you guys getting hurt and slowing me down. He boasted. Sure, whatever, sneered Sasuke. As for Sakura, she was feeling a little nervous. Just the other day, Sasuke had criticized her after she attempted again to get him to go on a date with her, saying that she was weaker than Naruto, and how at least he took his training seriously. Am I really capable of doing this? She wondered sadly. Yet if I don't go, I'll just be proving Sasuke right. With that thought in her mind, determined to prove to her crush what she was capable of, Sakura resolved to compete in the exam. Land of Fire. Konoha. Barbecue joint. Asuma-sensei was trying to hide his hesitation, yet Shikamaru knew the man was worried about his team agreeing to apply for the Chunin exam. Obviously the system required all three genin to individually consent to it, and Asuma was worried about Shikamaru opting out. The bossy and prideful Ino Yamanaka would still want to do it, to help prove what she was capable of, while Choji would most likely follow his lazy friend's lead. So why is he asking me to do something that he knows I wouldn't want to do? And Naruto said the exam has a high fatality rate, so why enter a rookie cell that has only been in service for only 4 months? Rookie. Shikamaru gave a big yawn, and blinked at his teacher, Asuma. How many of the other rookie squads are participating in the exam? Asuma gave almost no reaction to being caught, except Shikamaru still noticed something flash through the man's eyes. Satisfied, he raised a knowing eyebrow. Sighing, his teacher conceded defeat. Both teams 7 and 8 have been recommended by their Jonin senseis. Ino immediately got worked up about the idea of Sakura being in the exam, and was angrily threatening both Choji and Shikamaru to agree to join so that she could compete against, and best, her former friend turned rival for Sasuke's affections. For his part, the large boy was nervous since he was also remembering the casualty rate. On the other hand, Shikamaru did not want Naruto, Shino, Hinata, or Kiba to be in the exam and possibly die. Shikamaru felt an uncharacteristic twitch of anger at the idea that the Jonin teachers might be entering their students to try and compete with each other. Based on some of Naruto's complaints, I've concluded that their team only cooperates when they have a common enemy. Kakashi probably volunteered his students for that abattoir to try and get them to fully come together. Then the other Jonin felt the need to prove that theirs were ready too. Which means my friends might get killed to satisfy their teachers' egos. Neither Naruto, Kiba, nor Sasuke will back down from the challenge. Hinata will go to try and prove to herself that she is stronger, and maybe the same for Sakura, although I haven't seen her enough lately to be sure. As for Shino, he's probably got enough reason to be confident, and thinks he can keep the others alive. Yet in all likelihood most of my friends might still end up crippled or dead, at the hands of people years older and more experienced than them. With another yawn that concealed a scowl, Shikamaru meekly conceded to Ino's coercion, claiming it would be a bother if his mom found out that he had missed his chance to be a Chunin. Troublesome. Now I just have to find a way to keep alive everyone I actually like being around, without actually getting promoted myself. Land of Fire. Konohagakure. A park. An hour later. Whoops. Sorry guys, gotta take a break, Naruto said to Konohamaru Sarutobi and his friends, Udon and Moegi, as he glanced at his watch. His three younger friends were used to this now, and gave Naruto some space as they went back to playing ninja. A few minutes later, Naruto was hit by the newest wave of information from his clones. While Haku had toned down the amount of physical training Naruto had to do in the afternoon, along with how much was being taught and tested, learning about seals and tactics remained a priority, and were knowledge Naruto was still devouring as much as he could. Off to the side, Haku was juggling some blunted kunai, waiting for the third Hokage's grandson to be paying attention before lazily tossing them at the kid. The usually gentle boy had gotten along well with the kids, and was happy to help with their training. In this case he was giving tips for throwing at a makeshift target. Although he could sense that the Anbu watchers were always a lot closer when the ex-assassin was near the child. Only keeping partial attention on what he was doing, Haku continued to reflect upon what had happened yesterday. When Iruka approached me about improving Naruto's social life by finding him people who would want to be his friends, I wonder how much he was planning for the same thing to happen to me. To make me a better companion for Naruto. Spending that time with Naruto's new friends, the older ones, had been fun. He had never really had the chance to interact with people like that before. In the Bloody Mist village it had been too dangerous lest people learn his secrets, and within Zabuza-sama rebel army, his status had created a level of separation from the rest. Thus to his consternation, upon coming to the Hidden Leaf with a strange young genin, his life had been turned around. Until the day he died, he would never forget Naruto's private words to him on why he wanted Haku to come along with his other friends. Flashback. Because you deserve to have a good life too, Haku. You told me what your life was like before with Zabuza, what happened to you, and you've suffered so much. Yet even afterwards, despite what you had endured, you stayed a good person. You're merciful to the extreme, valuing life wherever you saw, so long as it was not a threat to those most precious to you. You could never kill your heart, because you knew what a treasure it was, and so did Zabuza, that's why he never truly made you kill it. So let's go have some fun with the guys, and enjoy ourselves. Flashback end. Present. With a girlish giggle, Haku retrieved the kunai so Konohamaru and his friends could try again. Land of Fire. Konohagakure. Training Field 27. Later that evening, Haku casually brushed away some dirt on his clothes and examined some small cuts in the cloth and looked around. The field appeared to be a mini war zone, with craters from explosions, and cuts and gouges in the trees. That his clones can create an arsenal made of copies of the original's weapons, can be quite fearsome indeed. Especially since they are not as concerned about conserving how many weapons they have left, like normal ninja are, he reminded himself. Although he still needs work pulling them out of seals. While most of the seals had worked perfectly, a few had still been dismal failures, and Naruto had foolishly failed to check them all beforehand. Said boy was currently lying on the ground, soaked with frigid water, and immobile thanks to all the needles puncturing him. Haku kept his guard up though, since he knew that one or two clones remained intact and in hiding, waiting for him to lower his guard for a final attempt at an ambush. Trying to restrain me with those clones and chains, while others detonated explosions all over the surround woods so that I would not attempt a substitution technique with a log, was not a bad idea. You just failed to account for me using one of your own clones and then using the transformation technique to turn myself into you to sow confusion. Kakashi did the same thing when he tested us, Naruto bitterly bit out. Should have remembered that. Next time then, Haku pleasantly said. You're already planning counters to whatever I'm planning, aren't you? A familiar, girlish giggle was the answer. And you're still holding way back, aren't you? Straightening up and getting serious, Haku walked over to Naruto and started gently pulling out Senbon. Yes, and you know why. Before Naruto could answer, he continued, experience. I can do more with less, which is why you have to always be on guard in that exam tomorrow. Most of those people will have been doing this a lot longer than you. Also, remember that even other Leaf Shinobi are rivals in this. Trust no one, Naruto. Weakly, Naruto nodded. Good. Then let's get you back for an early rest. You'll need it tomorrow, Haku finished with a pleasant smile. If it wasn't for how he goes to the bathroom, I would still swear he's a girl, a drowsy Naruto reflected for the umpteenth time. Off to the side, hidden in the trees, Iruka turned to look at his companion beside him, one of Haku's ice clones with whom he had been observing the spar. Alright, maybe he will survive this, but I'm still worried. My original understands and agrees, the clone replied calmly. However, Naruto's pride is driving him now after Sasuke's provoking. Thankfully, he should be strong enough to stay alive through the test, and hopefully he will learn from it. The scar-faced teacher sighed. Yeah, except there's still all the other kids, he said worriedly. Land of Fire. Konohagakure. Chunin Exam Building. The next day. Jonin Captain Ibiki Morino, ranking officer of the Torture and Interrogation Corps, watched the video screens with interest, as he carefully anticipated the best moment to make his entrance and intimidate the wee, fragile little genin. The building was riddled with concealed cameras after all. Around him, his subordinates voiced their own observations. One proctor reported how one of Kakashi Hataki's cell had been beaten by Might Guy's protege, only for Ibiki to deem it irrelevant. The Uchiha's psych reports indicated that his ego was big enough without letting him know how much attention his superiors were paying him. One of the older genin from the Hidden Leaf had stepped forward a few minutes to apparently give some advice to the rookies. What were their teachers thinking, letting them compete? Most of the room within earshot was paying attention because the white-haired, bespectacled reject had done the Chunin exam several times before, and knowledge was power. Also, they were bored while waiting, driving up their nerves. Instead of being intimidated by how dangerous this test was supposed to be, the Uzumaki boy had responded with a defiant declaration to the room, ignoring how the room was full of trained killers who were older and bigger than him, and would be unimpressed with his foolhardy boasting. Ibiki had been about to make his move then, when one of the proctors indicated how the Soul Genin team from the Hidden Sound was on the move, apparently getting ready to attack someone. I'll let it happen. Those kids should be strong enough to survive the initial strike, and then when everyone's distracted by it, we'll burst in and defuse everything with some killing intent. With everyone's adrenaline already pumping, we'll be even more intimidating. A minute later, and true to expectations, The dark presence of the Ibiki and the proctors quickly got everyone to settle down, with most of the examinees delightfully undermined before they even received the espionage test disguised as a written test, and the underlying psychological warfare they would be facing. There was some commotion when one of the Leaf Genin who had already had a year or two of experience could not find his application form to exchange for his seating assignment card to start the test, and his teammates started yelling that they had seen him with it. Noting body cues that the brats were telling the truth, Ibiki snarled at them to shut up and fill out one of the spare application forms the proctors kept, and sit down before he threw them out of the building. Inside though, the torture expert was smirking with anticipation, wondering if someone had stolen it, and started speculating as to why. As he walked towards his desk, Naruto felt a certain someone's eyes bore into the back of his skull, and gave a knowing smirk. Then the more professional side that Haku was trying to install promptly wiped it away. A few minutes later, I can't make heads or tails of this stuff, Naruto groaned as he looked at the exam questions he had to answer. Nothing Haku's taught me covers this. Could Haku actually have been teaching me wrong? Shaking his head, Naruto dismissed that traitorous thought, closed his eyes, and tried to think. It took him a full 10 minutes to finally work it out, and even then it was only because he caught the furtive motions of others cheating, combined with how many candidates were being dismissed for being caught. It's really a test to see how well we can cheat. Ah man, I'm not an espionage ninja. I'm a combat type. And others here, medics, trackers, support. How are they supposed to get by? Sasuke could probably manage it still with his Sharingan at least. Kakashi had been adamant about Sasuke having that ability after they had nearly all died on the bridge, using genjutsu and some other tricks to help draw it out. Apparently that was improper amongst the Uchiha, yet Sasuke had quickly bit it down and begun practicing with it. Kakashi even cheerfully noted that the job had been easier than he had expected. Naruto paused for a moment before smirking. So the point is that we show how adaptable we are. How balanced our teams are so that they can support each other. Now he was outright grinning with glee. And how prepared. Casually, Naruto erased his name from his exam, leaned back with his hands behind his head, waiting for another mind to connect the dots. Soon he had the sensation that people were glaring at him like before, though this time he suspected that Sakura and Sasuke were also doing it, yet Naruto carefully waited for the third mind to figure out why he was being so carefree. About a minute later his intended audience got the message, and it happened. One of the Leaf Ninja stood up, clasped his hands together to help mold his chakra, and exhaled raw wind chakra. It was crude, and a technique for an utter novice, yet so much chakra was infused within it that it worked. Contestants across the room braced themselves against the blustery onslaught, while their papers flew around. Moving quickly, Naruto grabbed several of these sheets, and quickly threw away the ones that had the least written on them. A moment later, the name of the best one was erased and his own was written down. The proctors effortlessly bowled through the wind to grab the offender, only for him to disappear in a cloud of smoke. The extra contestant, Ibiki realized with grudging acceptance, was really a disguised clone. Someone inserted it into the crowd, probably before even entering the room, as a hidden backup. An acceptable move, though they could have still pulled it off more professionally. Especially since he allowed his competition the opportunity to cheat as well, and risked his teammates being unprepared. He made a subtle gesture to the proctors to signal that the stunt was sufficiently well done so that the guilty party would not be penalized for it, even though one of the examiners had doubtless caught who had been the most prepared for what happened. Sakura was still confused, yet Sasuke had quickly recalled what Naruto had done just before they entered the examination room. Just like Haku did at the bridge, except this time he is up front, while the clone is the backup, he thought with a scowl. It stung to remember how the whole time he had thought he was fighting Haku, he had only been fighting a clone of the masked assassin. His own test had been lost, but he had memorized the answers so it was not a problem retrieving another, and Sakura had been far enough away that hers was okay. He took a gamble that we would not lose our sheets, or that we would be able to get the answers again, but I guess it worked out after all, somehow. Papers were returned, and the complaining hidden leaf ninja whose exam was missing was ignored, and he was given a fresh sheet and told to get back to answering the questions. Elsewhere in the room, Karen Uzumaki, ostensibly a genin from the village hidden in grass, and secretly a spy for Lord Orochimaru of the Hidden Sound, was careful to memorize the face of a certain blonde-haired boy at the exam. Her master's mission after all had been to participate in the Chunin exams to take note of all ninja she encountered in the process with unusually high chakra levels, or otherwise caught her attention. Anyone from genin taking the exam, to Konoha shinobi she encountered while staying in the village. While not a perfect method, the strength of a person's chakra is still generally a good way to identify how powerful they were, and Karen had been trained, conditioned, coerced, etc., to remember every chakra signature she had ever sensed. She had to, because to the white snake, failure was little better than betrayal. Yet the main reason she was so focused on that loudmouth was because of how when he entered the exam room, he had claimed how no one was going to beat him. Dream on, shrimp, but most importantly, that he was of the Uzumaki clan. Liar. There almost none of us left, and we're all redheads. Moreover, none of us would want to paint a target on ourselves like that. He probably just did that to distract everyone from noticing that disguised clone he snuck in, she speculated angrily. But I'll make sure that pretender realizes what a big mistake that was. The moron even went on to yell at the proctor about how he wouldn't be intimidated by him, and wouldn't back down. Stupid. If he'd stayed silent, more would have dropped out and made less competition for him. She would have done something about him already, yet she did not want to blow her cover, either as a spy for man who delighted in live human experimentation, or reveal that she actually was aware of her heritage. That little secret she had managed, hopefully, to hide even from the Orochimaru, pretending confusion to vague comments about her potential as he fished for information. Despite her anger though, Karen had noticed how ridiculously massive the blonde's chakra was, and how there was something else about it. Unfortunately, she still had a job to do, and had to still pass the exam and memorize everyone else's chakra signature before she could concentrate on him. Truthfully, her master probably did not care too much about her or her mission, which was why he had not put any serious effort into determining if she was lying or not about her knowing who her clan was. Land of Fire. Outside of Konohagakure. Outside of Training Ground 44, aka the Forest of Death. The proctor in charge of the second examination, Special Jonin Anko Mitarashi, was making it perfectly clear what was expected of them for the survival test that was to last 5 days. Each team was given one of 2 different scrolls, a heaven, or an earth, scroll, and they would need both to pass to the final round. Consequently, at bare minimum, half the contestants would have to fail in this forest. This is your opportunity to prove that you are truly worthy to be a ninja, Anko elaborated with a distinct lack of empathy. If you cannot survive suddenly being thrown into a situation where you've lost your supplies and have to live off the land, while hordes of enemies are trying to kill you to gain whatever intelligence you possess, or to just kill you for the heck of it, then it's best that you perish here and now instead of on an important mission. If you make the slightest mistake, you'll die and get your teammates killed too. On that same note, we've got some consent forms for you to sign. She finished with a cheerful tone. Anko's smirk never left her face as she watched everyone slowly come to grips on what was expected of them. A series of life and death battles over 5 days in a dangerous terrain, when almost no one had prepared enough supplies beforehand for what was now expected of them. Troublesome, Shikamaru thought. Choji's clan ninjutsu techniques require lots of calories, and his personal supplies won't be enough for the 3 of us for long. If we can't get to the tower fast, then we'll have to attack other teams just to get their food to stay at full strength. Naruto's ceiling scrolls means he might have enough food though. Kiba was enthusiastically telling his teammates how they would easily succeed at this, since all their skills emphasized locating and tracking down enemy ninja. Mother will have lots of blood here, Gaara promised to himself, his bloodthirsty cravings gone unseen beneath his impassive mask. Orochimaru's subordinates were mentally preparing themselves for their upcoming missions, discreetly keeping their attention on their targets. As for the White Snake himself, he was chuckling away at how close he was to Anko, and how oblivious his former apprentice was to how close she was to the man she despised above all others. Other teams were trying to psych themselves up, their pride in face of all their rivals keeping them from trying to leave. As for Naruto, a comment from Sakura as they were leaving the classroom earlier about how loud he was being, reminded him of Haku's teachings, and he quieted himself down to try and act discreet. Gotta stay calm. This is just like at the bridge in Wave. Lots of enemies, so I've got to stay smart if I, Sasuke, and Sakura-chan are going to succeed at this. Inside of the Forest of Death. Day 1. What do you think we should do first, Sasuke? Sakura asked, trying to sound cheerful and not nervous. Truthfully, she had already thought of a lot of strategies, yet she just knew that Sasuke would have the best one already. Sasuke just grunted, trying to ignore the pinkett. Truthfully, military rank did not matter to Sasuke, only fighting strong opponents. While passing the exam and becoming a Chunin would indeed help provide more opportunities to improve and test his skills, he was more interested in pitting himself against other contestants in life and death struggles to assess his skills. That alone was worth all this nonsense. The would-be Avenger knew that he had nowhere to start in trying to find that man, and that he would likely be judged, not emotionally qualified, to join the Hunter Ops. So his only alternative was to wait for that man to come to him. For of course he would. Eventually that man would come to face Sasuke to test him, or leave clues for Sasuke to seek him out, and then there would be vengeance. No, the only purpose of this exam to Sasuke was for him to prove himself by fighting the strongest he could find. Meanwhile, Naruto was busy debating the pros and cons of his next decision. One on hand, it will let us progress through this exam a lot faster, on the other it will cost a lot of chakra. I've got a lot, except should I really use so much from the get-go? And anyone who can recognize me, despite using the transformation technique, will know I can use the technique and that I have so much chakra. Then he smiled. Of course I can just concentrate clones on the ones who visibly react, and take them out. Even if my clones lose, they'll still be able to learn something about the abilities of the other guys in turn. That way when we fight them later on, not only will only the toughest will be left, but our team will already know some of their skills. On that note, I'd better make sure to find that red-haired kid from the hidden sand, and have the clones try and figure out what he can do. Oh, and make sure me, Sakura, and the jerk stay far, far away from him. He was brave, not stupid. Making up his mind, Naruto finished unrolling one of his scrolls, with his teammates catching his movements from the corners of their eyes. Naruto, what are you doing? Sakura snapped. Changing clothes. What? Does wearing bright orange in here seem practical to you? Naruto shot back, as he reached the seal he wanted, and in a burst of chakra a new pair of pants and a jacket was unveiled. These were colored in camouflage patterns ideal to the forest. Could you guys turn around for a minute? Sakura's face colored red, and just stared, gaping at her teammate in embarrassment, anger, and sheer disbelief, leaving it to Sasuke to respond with a disgusted voice. Why should we, Dobi? Go behind a tree or something? Because we have to stay together when enemies are all around us, Naruto responded with exaggerated patience, as he began to strip regardless of what his team did. Sakura quickly turned around, giving Naruto the chance to continue, which leads me to my next idea. I can create an army of clones that can separate into 3-man cells, who will then disguise themselves, and spread out. Fighting down a surge of emotions, Sasuke scoffed at the idea. That's stupid and wasteful. So you don't want up-to-date intelligence on what the other teams can do, where easily available scrolls are, and a way to avoid enemy teams. Naruto continued, in his calm and level voice that somehow infuriated his team even more, since it went completely against their earlier impressions and perceptions of their comrade. Which of course is how Haku convinced him to use it instead of yelling all the time. Not that he always remembered to do so. Before Sasuke to muster a retort, since he knew that dismissing receiving intelligence would sound stupid, and might be mentioned to Kakashi later, Naruto unilaterally created hundreds of clones which instantly dispersed. Glad to see you guys agree. Naruto cheekily grinned, as he sealed his beloved orange outfit up, and began to pack the rest of his stuff up. Something's got to change, Sasuke growled fiercely to himself. The Dobi's acting like he's surpassed me. I'll show him the truth during this exam. Hours later, deeper in the forest of death. Naruto mused aloud as Team 7 raced through the trees, face scrunched up. What? Sakura yelled at him, infuriated at how much Naruto was taking the lead. Nothing, he finally said as he shook off his distraction. He had barely realized he was even talking aloud. Just got a look at a pretty girl's panties when she jumped away. They're too far away to go see more though. Hissing in disgust, Sakura pointedly ignored him. Best not tell them, Naruto decided. That grass ninja is no genin, not with those skills. I want to fight people and get stronger too, yet my clones are getting cut down like no tomorrow. Not even Haku tears them apart like that. If I tell Sasuke, he'll want to fight him to show his strength. Naruto made a few more clones to replenish those destroyed, and to inform the rest of his copies to disperse more to help draw away the enemy powerhouse. At any rate, these battles were helping provide Naruto with greater information on his increasingly frustrated enemy, as well as showing Naruto some cool tricks. Still, he needed more distance for tomorrow. Even clones as advanced as these would only last so long, and in the morning he would have to make more. Creating a whole new flood of clones spreading out across the forest could give away their position to someone so skilled. It's curious though, how many of the stronger ninja I'm meeting these days are so effeminate. Still, at least Haku doesn't use snakes. Naruto frowned as he assimilated memories of dispersed clones. Based upon signs from one battle, Hinata, Kiba, and Shino had staged a trap which had successfully netted them a scroll. Unfortunately, it had also resulted in the deaths of a fellow Leaf squad. It appeared that Team 8 regretted this, since they had made a point of making a quick burial to protect the remains so that they could be collected for later, yet it emphasized how bloodthirsty this exam was. Hidden Leaf had killed Hidden Leaf, a disturbing concept. Due to the sheer number of participants from Konohagakure, most of Naruto's disguised clones wore that headband to help blend in, and yet his fellow countrymen were just as dangerous as the foreigners in their desire to succeed. Some just seemed desperate as time passed and the enormity of the challenge before them sunk in, and others did try to attack to just wound or capture their comrades, yet it was still shocking, terrifying even, and raised disquieting questions for Naruto. Elsewhere in the forest, Tenten beamed with pleasure as Naruto's clone led them to the aftermath of a battle between two cells. The fighting had been so bloody and fierce as they went at each other with kunai that only one person out of the 6 genin was left alive. Even then, the survivor was only still breathing because another group of Naruto's clones had done emergency first aid. Thanks again, Naruto, she said cheerfully. Seeing Lee take Sasuke's ego down a notch was worth it. I only wish I had a camera for it. And besides, training with you guys helped get me here. See ya when this is over. Rock Lee was about to begin an emotional outburst about the youthful flames Naruto possessed when Tenten clapped a hand over his mouth. Enemy territory, she said calmly, and Lee immediately stilled himself. Might Guy had made it perfectly clear in the past that there was a time and place for trying to inspire people about the springtime of youth, and this was not one of those times. Might Guy had made it perfectly clear that Tenten's advice was to always be heated in dangerous situations, citing her ability to always keep a clear mind. For his own part, Neji Hyuga only stared with narrowed eyes at the Uzumaki boy's clone. He was too pragmatic to pass up the chance to get an easy scroll, yet he wanted to fight the original, since he was the one to initially cause the Lady Hinata to become more unjustifiably confident. In another part of the forest, Shikamaru and Naruto shook hands on the deal they had secretly made. The latter was unwilling to directly provide food to a rival squad, even if members of it were friends, but he was happy to tell them where to find some injured foreigner cells that they could raid for their food. Naruto benefited because these enemy teams were still a potential threat, so Shikamaru would discreetly guide Ino and Choji towards them and take them out. I've already got about 42 plans developed based on where we can use the terrain, how weary they will be, and our abilities to get the scrolls and food without too much effort, Shikamaru thought confidently, but the real concern in this exam in terms of competition might actually be Naruto. Clones with such range should require a lot of chakra, and yet I thought he said he was a wind element. Not simple elemental clones then. Something is a little off on his abilities, including his rapid progress. No matter, too troublesome to worry about it until we see if we have to face him in the next round. Besides, it's not like he'll want to really hurt us. With Team 7, Sasuke had pulled ahead of the squad to take point, forging the way as they walked through the forest, to help assert how he was the most suited to lead. Naruto did not protest, mostly because he was a little distracted by the constant flow of information as clones died from enemy squads, the wildlife if I could seal one of those tigers in a scroll, and other natural hazards. I've got to get a handle on this, Naruto thought as he winced with pain. That last clone had died by a fire jutsu, and while the clone had quickly dispersed before the burns became too severe, Naruto still experienced a ghost of it. This method is incredibly useful. My clones aren't strong enough to beat other squads unless I have enough clones around, and I can't even manage that with so many threats, so it's just information, but I'm still learning a lot. I've figured out from Team 8 that the red-headed eyebrowless kid from Hidden Sand is named Gaara like Kabuto said, and uses sand of all things to fight. I have a rough idea of which squads might be in the third round from their skills, but it's a distraction when I keep receiving all this information out of the blue. I have to learn how to absorb it without being distracted. I'll have to talk to Haku. He did not even notice how he wanted help from Haku first, and not Kakashi. For Sakura, she was getting a little nervous as time passed. The anticipation as she waited for some enemies to appear was getting to her. They had the scroll they needed now since Naruto's clones had brought one. The clone explained the former users had been killed by the wildlife, and when Sasuke insisted on seeing the bodies, they had found signs of the most gigantic bear Sakura could imagine, yet something just seemed wrong. They had seen no sign of any enemies or other animals, just the three of them as they traveled. Where is everyone? She wondered. Sakura was also worried about how they were just walking on the ground, when someone could try and ambush them from above, but she knew she did not have the chakra reserves to run up and leap across trees without tiring out soon. I'll ask Kakashi-sensei if he can help with me with my reserves, she thought hopefully. Land of Fire. Konohagakure. Some generic bar, safe and sound. Haku was rubbing his forehead in frustration as he listened to what Kakashi Hatake had to tell him. Obviously I have to still work on teaching Naruto to not be ruled by his ego, he thought regrettably. Oh well, he still did good to get past the first exam when so many others failed. For his part, Kakashi only gave an eye smile of amusement at Haku's woes. Truthfully, he was still a little resentful of how Haku had taken over training Naruto so much, and how it had thrown Kakashi's plans off, but he had to also appreciate how much safer it made Naruto. Hopefully getting a few drinks together would help mend some fences. Back with Team 7, the sun was starting to go down, and Naruto was trying to get Sasuke to stop so that they could camp out. Come on Tem. Traveling through the dark is stupid. We can set up a camp and have time to put up traps if start now. Quiet, Dobi, the Uchiha retorted without looking back, we'll be fine for a bit longer, and we need to get to the tower as soon as possible. Naruto just scowled at the back of Sasuke's head, his education from Haku screaming that it was a bad idea. Fed up, he just stopped walking, sat down, and began to pull out relevant sealing scrolls. Sasuke could tell from the sounds what Naruto was doing right away, but gave no response since he hoped that it would pressure Naruto into catching up, but it was half a minute before Sakura realized what was happening. Naruto, what are you doing? We've got to stay together to pass this exam. I know, so why don't you guys get back here? Naruto shot back as he unsealed some sleeping bags, ninja wire, lots and lots of explosive tags, and lots of other assorted gear. Fuming, both Sakura and Sasuke doubled back and helped set up the traps and shelter. The latter stood off to the side, pointedly ignoring his blonde teammate, while Sakura started cooking dinner. This will really impress Sasuke-kun. She thought with brief happiness over the food she was preparing and how it would help prove she would be the perfect wife, before remembering how angry she was. Inner Sakura resumed spewing out insults at Naruto, while questioning what gave him the right to try and act cool like Sasuke. Finally, Sakura just snapped. Naruto, she yelled at him. In a flash, he was beside her with his hand over her mouth, quiet. He hissed. Looking around, he noticed Sasuke was up in a crouch, and also checking the perimeter. We're trying to keep a low profile, the blonde fiercely whispered to his pink-haired teammate, so if you've got something to say, keep it down. He stepped back as she kept glaring at him. Finally she hissed, what do you think you're doing? You've been acting on your own, forcing us to follow your lead, and from all this, she gestured at what Naruto had unsealed, you've been hiding from us what your real skills are. Your teammates need to know those kinds of things to help keep us all alive. Naruto just stared at her blankly for a moment, before, you actually think I'm a teammate? Sakura was confused at this question, meanwhile Sasuke pretended to be ignoring them both by having his back to them while keeping an eye out for people trying to sneak up on them all. He was also turning on his Sharingan at intervals to make sure there was no sign of enemy chakra nearby. All you and Sasuke have done is ignore me or insult me or hit me from day one, Naruto continued tactlessly, and I didn't think you would believe me or pay any attention if I actually showed you what I was capable of now. Because you wouldn't accept what I'm capable of. Am I wrong? Sakura opened her mouth to refute it, yet even inner Sakura was strangely silent. She stared and stared at him, while the smell of food wafted over and her hand felt the soft sleeping bag Naruto had provided beside her, before she lowered her head. Sorry, she said faintly. Naruto was impassive for a moment, before breaking out his trademark grin, no problem. What about you Sasuke, anything to say? The Avenger in training was conflicted for a moment, caught between his need for vengeance and his need for companionship. Sadly, the part of him that was afraid of feeling the pain of losing anyone again, won over. Did you say something? Konohagakure. Kakashi looked up from his Make Out Paradise book, a feeling of wonderment welling up inside of him. What is this sensation? He thought with confusion. Back in the forest. With long practice, Naruto hid the pain that he felt at that comment, and instead said, nah. I need to get some sleep now though. Got a lot of memories in my head to sort through. And with that he unzipped the nearest sleeping bag, crawled in, and went to sleep. Sakura was a little unsure for a moment if Sasuke was trying to be hurtful or not, but she quickly distracted herself from such silly thoughts. Of course Sasuke wouldn't do that. I wonder where Naruto got all this equipment from. It must have cost a lot. Oh, from the wave mission when it got bumped up to an A- rank. I thought he spent his entire share of the mission pay on ramen. Land of Fire. Outside of Konohagakure. Training Ground 44, aka the Forest of Death. Examination Tower. Day 2 of the exam. Late morning. Exam proctor Anko was sitting on a couch while one of her subordinates brought her some water and food to replenish her exhausted body. Anko accepted the offerings gracefully, knowing the man meant well. Unfortunately, the root cause was the curse mark on the back of her neck, which was disrupting her body ever since she had briefly fought her former teacher, Orochimaru. The man had infiltrated the exam for reasons unknown, and had briefly fought his former student when she had caught up with him, before activating the curse mark he had put on her and had then departed. Before her were the two Anbu who had helped escorted her here through the forest of death, and were waiting for her to finally give her report, while a third Anbu stood by to memorize her story to relay it directly to the third Hokage. When I found him, Orochimaru, Anko panted, he seemed a little annoyed actually. Maybe even angry. It was faint, he was trying to hide it, but it was like when he did an experiment and it failed, and he later learned it was a defect at the supplies he had acquired. I think that whatever happened in there, something beyond his control interfered. He toyed with me a bit before leaving, and when I tried to figure out his agenda, he kept deflecting my attention with insults and insinuations. Probably the sudden swell in competitors, the bird-faced Anbu captain, Bird, theorized. At Anko's questioning look, he elaborated, the observing Anbu reported approximately 300 unregistered contestants coming out of nowhere. It's possible that their presence distracted Orochimaru enough that he ran out of time, afraid that he would encounter one of the patrolling squads. We're not strong enough to stop him, but we would last long enough to get some sort of warning or message off on his location. Anko bowed her head in thought at that. What was not commonly known was how the village leader who was hosting the Chunin exams would dispatch Anbu squads to watch over the contestants as a form of insurance. This prevented any of the competing villages from inserting any ringers that were contending solely to eliminate the most promising members of the younger generations from rival hidden villages. Otherwise, someone could theoretically insert someone whose rank was only genin but whose threat level was an A+ ranked threat, who would then slaughter all the competition during a survival exercise. The Anbu were also tasked with collecting the corpses of any ninja whose bodies held valuable secrets. Some ambitious young genin would try to earn promotions by capturing, dead or alive, the bloodlines of a rival village. Just as how the body of a main branch Hyuga was to be returned as intact as possible if they died competing in a foreign village, the Hidden Leafs Anbu had to keep track of all the foreigners running around the forest of death and preserve their remains if they died. Failure to do so would have severe repercussions. I guess whoever did that screwed up that carrot and asterisk S scheme, but they probably made things too difficult for you to know what else was going on. Yeah, we've been working overtime on it, Bird replied, couldn't be helped though. Still, not surprised the Uzumaki boys still making life hard for us. Anko said in surprise. Yeah, we recognize their body language, and some of them dropped their disguises to confer with the boys' friends. Anko scowled at that. Such opportunities would not be available in real life, naive fool. Yep. Still, he did manage it to try and weaken the squads that weren't from here. We'll have to make up some report in case the other villages call foul about our own genin cooperating though. Land of Fire. Outside of Konohagakure. Training Ground 44, aka the Forest of Death. Day 2. Afternoon. Team 7 had been making their way further and further into the forest. Occasionally Sasuke would head up a tree to get a look at the sun to confirm they were heading in the right direction, and that they were making excellent time in getting to the tower at the center of the forest. Something's not right, he thought irritably, I should have fought someone by now. But we've been alone this entire time. But why is it? Then his eyes locked onto Naruto, and he forced himself to consider a bitter truth, could the Dobi be keeping everyone else away? No, it's impossible that his clones could be skilled enough to do so. The idea that Naruto's clones were fighting the enemy cells had never occurred to Sasuke until now. In truth, they were mostly just drawing off the other squads or distracting them. Alright, stop and think. I'll just head off in another direction. When we run into someone to fight, that'll prove that I've just had bad luck, and he's not behind this. With that in mind, Sasuke raced down the tree and headed at a sharp angle from their initial path. Come on, this way, he called without looking back. Seeing him quickly disappearing, Sakura and Naruto had no choice but to chase after their reckless teammate, one wondering why her crush was suddenly acting so contrary, and the other mildly annoyed. I think that there's some enemies up ahead. No matter, I never got any bad vibes from them, and now I can test out my own skills, Naruto thought with a feral grin. He was feeling much cockier now since there had not been any more signs of that particular hidden grass genin with the snakes. They continued on for about half an hour, when suddenly Kunai came flying them from ahead and above. Surrender, hidden leaf, and we won't kill you. A voice called down to them. Looking up, Team 7 saw 3 hidden grass genin, a burly girl with black hair and about 15 years old, a more slender teenage boy about the same age with blonde hair and glasses, and finally a second girl with red hair, glasses, and maybe a little younger than the others. -0. Enter Naruto asked. Heavy violence. -0. In response, Sasuke just grunted with satisfaction and heedlessly jumped up to attack. Surprisingly, it was the red-haired girl who reacted first, despite how she was standing a little behind the other two, jumping down and snarling, "The blonde is mine." With that, she threw down a kunai with a letter bomb on it that forced Team 7 to separate, even as Naruto and Sakura tried to catch up with Sasuke. Then I'll take the hothead, the older girl called back as she leapt even higher to meet the raven-haired hidden leaf genin, while her male teammate silently dropped down to meet Sakura who was still staying on the ground. For Naruto's part, he rocketed backwards even further from his team to escape the fuselage of exploding notes and projectiles raining down on him from his attacker. With Sasuke, the older girl dodged a wall of fire and threw a barrage of kunai at the source. Quickly the raven-haired leaf ninja dodged the attack, and retaliated with his own. Around and around they circled each other, using chakra to propel themselves from tree to tree, throwing weapons at each other. Throughout it all, Sasuke kept his distance while she tried to get closer so that she could use her greater strength and mass to overpower him. Kid's not bad, she assessed, but he's still too inexperienced, misjudging his throws as he leaps around while trying to hit a target that's also moving. What was his Jonin-sensei thinking, putting him in this exam? Suddenly the boy in question mistimed a landing on another branch and stumbled. Seizing the opportunity, she charged him when she suddenly seemed to hit an invisible wall. Ninja wire. When did some of the shuriken he threw had ninja wire on them? But how did he know where I would go? Low on weapons but not on chakra, Sasuke cast a few quick hand signs and blew out a barrage of fireballs at his target that slammed into his entangled enemy's flesh. She screamed in horror before being cut off. Not bad, Sasuke sneered with his red eyes, but not good enough for a Uchiha. It was easy for my Sharingan to read your movements. With Sakura. Sakura screamed as another shuriken cut her arm. He's too strong, she thought with terror. Each projectile the older boy sent at her struck her in some way. No matter how she tried to block or dodge, they all hit. Every single one. She screamed for help from Naruto or Sasuke, but no one came, and that contemptuous smirk never left her enemy's face as she felt herself growing more and more exhausted. Is this really all you're capable of? Don't you have any talent at all? The grass genin finally asked, the genuine curiosity in his voice hurting Sakura more than disdain would have, as if he genuinely could not see any value in her. I'd assumed you were a medic or a sensor like Karen for a bit, but you wouldn't have tried taking me head on like that if you were. You showed some good use of basic ninja moves at first, but you've shown no signs you've learned anything since the academy. Why are you even here? Well, Sakura could only try to scowl up at him as he casually stood upon a higher tree branch, as she fought back tears. Suddenly the world around her seemed to dissolve, and she saw the male grass genin somehow further away and running towards Sasuke-kun. In a rush all of her injuries were gone, as well as the pain. Genjutsu. She realized, he was able to weave such a subtle genjutsu. Sharingan blazing, Sasuke saw how his enemy projected a wave of chakra that the young Uchiha realized was a genjutsu. Effortlessly seeing through it, he leapt forward, and rammed a kunai into his enemy's chest while locking eyes with him. Coughing out blood, the grass genin gave a rattling sound and collapsed. Smirking to himself, Sasuke took a moment to make sure Sakura was still alive, and went to find where Naruto was. -0. End Naruto Ost, heavy violence. -0. With Naruto and Karen. What's your problem, lady? Naruto yelled as the red-haired, red-eyed chick with glasses tried to cut him again. Did I do something to offend her or something? Her attacks are way too personal, and worse, she keeps driving me away from the others. You're a liar. You're no Uzumaki. Not with that hair. What? Naruto roared in rage. I am a Uzumaki. The old man said so since I was a kid. While there were many things that could anger Naruto, he was surprised to realize how much that insult hurt. In the end, his name was one of the few things he really had in his lonely life, and something no one had ever challenged before. You take that back. Wind release. Gale palm. And he clapped his hands together and blew Karen backwards with a blast of air. Fortunately for her, Naruto's lack of experience with the technique, especially when so distracted, meant that not enough chakra was properly put into it, so she was still barely able to keep her balance. Uzumaki have only red hair, like me. She snarled back. Every one of them except me is dead, and you have no right to insult my family like that. Saying you're one of us. Truthfully, Karen was a little more nervous about fighting the blonde name stealer now. She had felt how his chakra had suddenly engulfed the forest, and had spread throughout in those weird clones. Monitoring them had also led her to discover something horrible. Lord Orochimaru himself had been competing. The man had been hiding his chakra signature somehow, but when Karen had tried to figure out who was destroying so many of the clones so suddenly, she had found him. He'll know what's been happening, so I'll have to do a good job in proving I've got what he wanted, she thought nervously, but why was he fighting this boy? Seeing how they were just facing off against each other, with the blonde having a stupefied look on his face at her last statement, probably at being caught in the act, Karen focused her mind's eye of the Kagura onto him in full. And now Karen could only stare back in shock as she felt the presence of the person before her. It's so happy and bright. His chakra makes me feel warm inside just being around it. Are you really a Uzumaki? He asked hesitantly, eyes boring into her own. Why yes. Are you what you say you are? She responded, shocked at what she was sensing. I am Naruto Uzumaki, of the Uzumaki clan. Karen felt his chakra for any sign of the minute disruption that would happen if he lied, and Naruto looked for every hint of body language that Haku had trained him for, to tell if she was trying to deceive him. They both found nothing. Cousin. Both of them were crying as they embraced each other, finding family at last. Just to the side, the caret and asterisk hashes with Naruto Uzumaki. One of the observing Anbu muttered to his companion. Got me, was the response. One moment he's fighting her to the death, and now. Better radio into the third that he's found family. The Hokage should be prepared. Right. Back with Team 7. It was this scene that Sasuke discovered, his teammate hugging an enemy. Dobi, what are you doing? Why aren't you fighting her? Oh, hey Sasuke, Naruto called back while waving, guess what? I've found a long-lost relative. Sasuke could only stare in disbelief for half a minute as he processed how his teammate was not fighting an enemy like he was supposed to, was actually happily embracing said enemy and apparently not in a genjutsu, and of course, that the Dobi had found family. That the person who had grown up his entire life without a family had found someone while Sasuke had had everything he loved torn from him, and had suffered for it. Why? Why does he get all of that? Why him? Sasuke seethed. You do know that she and her teammates were just trying to kill us, right? He snarled, to which the blonde and red-headed idiots just blinked in confusion, apparently they had forgotten. Well, of course I say, were, because I killed the other two, the Uchiha added with a sneer. Karen gave a small gasp at that, and broke away from Naruto and headed in the direction Sasuke had come from. The would-be Avenger let her go, planning to deal with her once she got angry and attacked in revenge. Naruto followed behind, a studiously blank face on. Following at a more casual pace, Sasuke caught up to them, and almost stumbled in further surprise. I killed them. How? Contrary to expectations though, both the other grass ninja were alive and breathing, albeit painfully, while Karen worked to make them more comfortable. That was incredible, Sakura gasped, you healed them so fast, and from such mortal wounds. Is that what your teammate meant by you being a medic? Karen gave a distracted nod as she gave her comrades a quick survey, and answered absently, yeah, but my way is a little different than usual. For his part, Naruto was examining the discarded tool pouches. You guys only have one scroll, so you won't be able to advance to the last phase. You guys already have both. Karen said with surprise, paying more attention to Naruto than Sakura. Yeah, do you want to come to tower with us, or stay out here and compete more? Karen paused in thought, if we do pass to the next event, we'll have to fight someone who was able to do this to my teammates, who were a lot stronger than me. And my mission is to spy, not actually compete. Yet I should be able to still get a good assessment to report to Lord Orochimaru, just by waiting inside the tower. And, wait, as her mind caught up with something Naruto had said. Sakura had caught on as well. Naruto. She shrilled. Are you actually suggesting we take them with us? Yeah, why not? My clones can carry the others. It's not like they're a threat or anything. Sasuke so wanted to attack Naruto right here and now, but the pervading thought in his mind was how he needed both Sakura and Naruto in good shape to pass this part of the exam. Fighting strong opponents was his still main priority, and being able to advance to the last phase would help with that, especially given the scarcity of prey so far. I need him intact to proceed, to truly test myself, Sasuke harshly reminded himself. So he just gave a harsh grunt, got his bearings, and started walking towards the tower. Casting a quick look at Naruto, Sakura hurried after the object of her affections. Sasuke, do you know why Naruto wants to help that girl? Does he have a crush on her something? But Sasuke just grunted in response. A moment later, Naruto, Karen, and a bunch of clones carrying her teammates followed after them. That evening, just before it gets dark, from his hiding place, Orochimaru hissed with frustration as he observed the young Uchiha, his teammates, and Karen Uzumaki all entering the tower together to complete the second exam. If only those Anbu hadn't been keeping such a close eye out on the remaining contestants, and weren't so cautious after I'd already exposed myself. I'll have to wait for another opportunity to mark the boy with my curse mark for his Sharingan. He had considered ordering Kabuto to approach the young genin, building upon the faint trust established by helping them out just before the start of the first exam, but Orochimaru had concluded it too risky. While the Anbu were unlikely to break the teenager's cover, they would be suspicious of how he found that particular team when so many decoy ones were running around, and Team 7 was doing well enough that his second-in-command could not justify offering to help them out. On that note, I'll have to keep a closer eye on the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki. That little trick of his was surprisingly effective, and his clones fought better than expected for someone his age. I can still kill him or capture him even here in the village, but this is not the time to challenge the Akatsuki. Land of Fire. Outside of Konohagakure. Training Ground 44, aka the Forest of Death. Examination Tower. I think I'm glad I took Haku's advice to be the one to meet them, a rather confused Kakashi reflected as he took in the sight before him. Ordinarily, it was supposed to be a Chunin proctor who greeted the squads who completed the second exam and activated the special summoning scrolls, but Kakashi had approached the third Hokage and had gotten special permission. The third Hokage had been happy to encourage his emotionally damaged subordinate in bonding more with his students, and Kakashi thought it would help cohesion amongst the overall team if he was the one to congratulate them on their success. Instead, why are they here with a squad from Hidden Grass of all places? Has Naruto gone and befriended enemies again? Oh, hey Kakashi-sensei. This is Karen. She's going to be staying with me. What? Naruto, what are you saying? Karen said, feeling shocked and embarrassed. Well, if you stay here we can see each other. And wouldn't you rather stay in the hidden leaf? While Karen was still staring back in surprise, Sasuke was scowling at how Naruto was working to have a family, and Sakura was scandalized at how Naruto was inviting a foreign girl he had just met into his home. I would like to stay with family, Karen thought sadly, but with everything else, I can't make such a decision right away. Now, Naruto, Kakashi said weakly, you can't just spring a question like that on someone out of the blue. Why don't you wait a few more days first? Naruto pouted, but nodded his head in agreement. Good, then I can use the time to find out what the carrot and asterisk happened to my genin in that forest. Oh, Kakashi-sensei. Yes, Naruto, Kakashi asked, while desperately hoping for no more surprises. What's with that riddle up there? Without sparing a glance at the Chunin directive the third Hokage had written on the wall above, Kakashi explained, it means that a true Chunin should find the balance between their physical and mental skills. He had been about to elaborate further, when a thought struck him. While Sasuke certainly had that balance, Sakura was sorely lacking in strength or physical power. As for Naruto, it was becoming increasingly clear that he was developing the brainpower to match his body, even if this latest stunt put this progress into doubt. Expanding upon the topic might emphasize how far behind Sakura was compared to the two boys, which might jeopardize the improvement to their teamwork that Kakashi assumed had developed in the Forest of Death, so he decided to stay quiet. Their sensei gave a lazy wave to them all. Well, I'm off. You've got a few days to stay here, and there's lots of accommodations, food, water, beds, and whatnot. See the proctors about the rules, they want to do them in person to make sure you get them all, to avoid any conflict with foreigners. I'll be off back to the village to let folks there know you're all alright. Ciao. Then he paused and turned back to his genin, and gave an eye smile with his mask on, oh, and congratulations. And with that, Kakashi was gone, with his first intended destination being the third Hokage to have a serious talk. Sasuke just stalked off towards the far door, wanting to get the stupid guidelines out of the way so that he could get away from his stupid teammates, and to get to bed. Sakura followed faithfully afterwards, although a little subdued since she was reflecting on her only serious fight and the Hokage's decree that Kakashi had brushed over. Naruto offered to help Karen get her countrymen somewhere where they could heal, and so that they could get to know each other more. Day 5, end of the second exam. Despite the chance to relax, the ensuing days had still been busy ones. Naruto had used the time to fill in his teammates about all the intelligence he had gathered, but Sasuke had been rather contemptuous of the idea of fighting someone using sand, claiming he would just burn it into glass with his fire jutsu, which Sakura was very supportive of. When others had arrived, like Shikamaru and Choji, the blonde had been quick to warn them about what Team 8 had seen with that hidden sand squad from earlier, and had then told one of his clones, and Naruto also emphasized to all his friends how quickly those three had seemed to pass through the Forest of Death. That one squad from Hidden Sound had made it through too, and everyone had been reminded how as the only genin squad sent, they must be the best their village had available for representation. Naruto had also let Rock Lee and Tenten have some information, but given how they were older and more experienced, he had felt free to tell Hinata, Shino, Kiba, Shikamaru, and Choji what he knew about their abilities from his time training with the two of them under Might Guy's guidance. He would have also given information about Kabuto's group, but he had never really seen what they were capable of since the other two members destroyed his clones so fast, so he warned his friends that they were very fast and brutal. Yet even while he was showing off the fruits of his labors, Naruto had delegated a clone for the job, preferring to spend his personal time getting to know Karen, his newfound family member. Over the next few days they had spent a great time bonding with each other. Unfortunately, or so Naruto thought, Karen was 2 years older than him, so she got to treat him like a kid at times. She was also willing to slap him upside the head and yell at him for commenting on how weird her hair was, since the left side was long and straight, while the right side was shorter and spiky. She was pretty volatile like Sakura sometimes really. At least she apologized after Naruto clarified that he was complimenting her unusual red eyes, not criticizing her. Despite this, those few days were still some of the happiest that those two could remember. His friends had also been surprised to learn about her, and had been quick to welcome her, even if they were also a little dumbfounded by Naruto's invitation for Karen to stay in the Hidden Leaf even though she was from a rival hidden village. To Naruto's mild frustration though, Karen did not know much more about the Uzumaki clan than Haku did. Karen explained how the small town she had been born in had been destroyed when she was young, along with most of her surviving family there. All she knew was that they had fled there after Iwagakure had destroyed the hidden whirlpool village. Are we really the last two? Naruto wondered aloud. Karen flinched at that, though Naruto thought she was just thinking about how much they had lost. Should I tell him? She wondered. I've seen other redheads before, but one of them looked like one of my aunts. Yet if I mention to Yuya of the Sound 4, then I risk exposing my connection to Lord Orochimaru, and that could get both me and my newfound cousin killed. So she decided to put the decision off for now, and bask in the warm glow of her cousin's chakra and presence, glad to finally have a good friend like him. The fact that he was family only made it all the sweeter. In fact, the entire time there had only been one point where things between them had become tense. Flashback. Naruto was awoken from his nap by a gasp of shock. Looking around, he saw Karen staring at him in horror. In Naruto. Why yes. I was looking at your chakra some more, just because, and there's something, what are you? She finally cried out. There's something else, deep down inside of you, and it's, I. The Nine-Tails Demon Fox, Naruto cut in bitterly. Shock made Karen pause, and Naruto went on to explain what had happened to him the day he was born. Karen stared back in disbelief for a moment, and Naruto steeled himself for the worst, but then she smiled. I've heard of the tailed beasts in Jinchuriki before, I've heard a lot about them, but I know the stories aren't true with you, Naruto. I've felt your chakra, and I can tell it is untainted, and that it keeps the evil part buried down. Then she hugged him, and you're too nice to be a demon. She held him tight, and Naruto quickly followed suit, and she gave no notice to how Naruto quickly wiped some tears from his eyes.